I retired on 20 years the first time, and you go into the Fleet Reserve where you can be recalled, and you draw your retirement pay. And then they called me back in 1982, and I served until active duty again till August of 1990. Or it called me back in 1982, okay. And I served until August 1992.
But you were out in 92. You were out. You were done.
That was full retirement, 30 years.
Excellent.
Of active service.
Can you state your grade, your ETS grade?
I was a E-9, which is in the Navy is a Master Chief Petty Officer. My rating was a AVCM because the Aviation Electronics Technician Master Chief.
What was your life like in this valley?
Well, the earliest I can remember was when I was preschool. We had a, my dad worked in the coal mines out here in the Book Cliffs. If you went out 26 Road, which is actually 1st Street, and into the Book Cliffs, they had some canyons out there. They had the Thomas Mine in one canyon, and the other canyon had 3 other coal mines, the Farmer's Mine, Talarico Mine, and I can't remember the other mine. But my dad worked in them coal mines out there, and we lived in a tar paper shack up there in them hills. And later on, when he moved to the Farmer's Mine, then we moved into a rock house that they had out there. None of that is there anymore. Then we went to Egner, Colorado, where he worked in the coal mines somewhere out of there too. We lived in a tent. It had a wooden frame and wood floor in it. And I can remember one night they had a wood stove in there for cooking and heating. Lightning bouncing off that stove, hitting that stove in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. My dad worked on the railroad later on for the Denver and Rio Grande Western. And when they had steam engines, and we lived in Riverside down there, and I went to Riverside School my first year in grade school. And we lived down near the roundhouse, excuse me, and where they turned all the steam engines around and stuff down there. And he was still working for the railroad when they got their first diesel electric trains. And then he quit there, and we went and moved to California to Long Beach because he wanted to work in the Navy dry docks. And he was on one of the ships from World War II that came in there, and they were cleaning it up from kamikaze attacks. And they found the head of a Japanese pilot down there in the engine room on that ship. And then we didn't stay there too long. We lived in Long Beach, and we moved back to Grand Junction. And then we went into my later years where my dad had a construction company. We had a gravel pit out here where they have the Connected Lake State Park. A bunch of them lakes were probably part of our gravel pit that we dug out there. And then I graduated from high school here at Grand Junction. And so we had learned to run cats and dozers and loaders and drag lines and drive trucks. My brothers all went to hauling uranium ore, and I joined the Navy at 17. Went through boot camp in Great Lakes. And my first squadron was Patrol Squadron 22, flying the P2V Neptunes. So I guess I was 18, maybe 19 by the time I was flying in those things, flying out of Barbers Point, Hawaii, and we deployed to Iwakuni, Japan, where we flew in the Sea of Japan. And we went to Tainan, the Quemoy Islands during the times that the Red Chinese were attacking those islands, and we visited Hong Kong. We visited the Philippines. And then we come back to Barbers Point and had more training. And we went on a deployment to the Kwajalein Atoll in Eniwetok. In 1958, we did the atomic bomb tests out there, and we were flying around these explosions, monitoring the radiation levels and stuff. And we come back from that deployment after about 4 months, and it was called Operation Hardtack. And we went back for more training at Barbers Point, and we went through my first survival schools, and then we deployed to Adak, Alaska, in Kodiak, and we were flying patrols up there, monitoring the submarine activities and shipping of the Russians up in the Bering Sea and the northern Pacific there, and not too far from Vladivostok, Russia. We got a little close one time, and they would send us a message out letting us know that the Russians were launching airplanes on us, and we got to see a few MiGs off our wingtips. We'd go down about 50 feet off the water and head due east and get out of there. We did have some of the squadrons had got airplanes shot down during that period of time by the Russians. Fact is, they lost over 800 and some air crews and stuff to the Red Chinese, North Koreans, and the Russians during the Cold War. So it wasn't very cold for some of us.
You had to watch. You still had to, but you knew they were coming because you had a picture of them.
We would get radio signals that would tell us they had launched their MiGs and stuff. Then we'd get certain codes that would let us know that they were coming, yes. But them jets they had would catch them old P2V Neptunes. P2Vs only cruised about 180 mile an hour, where their jets were probably up there 300 whatever knots. But that was my first squadron, and after I served my 4 years, I decided to get out of the Navy in 1959. Got out for about 9 months, got married, decided to go back in the Navy. At that time, they were building up the air crews and the personnel for the early warning squadrons out of Newfoundland up there, and they were flying the North Atlantic Barrier. Again, this was a program where they were searching the skies for Russian bombers and missiles and stuff with this early warning squadron. And I went to VW-13, which is Airborne Early Warning Squad 13. We were originally home-based in Patuxent River, Maryland, flying out of Argentia, Newfoundland, with the barrier between Newfoundland and the Azores, which is off of Portugal. Then we moved the squadron permanently to Argentia, and we moved the barrier up to Iceland. And we had two barriers between Iceland and Greenland and between Iceland and Prestwick, Scotland. And we were flying again 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It didn't matter what the weather was. Them Super Constellation aircraft launched and went out and flew the barriers for 12 hours. So we would go a couple hours or an hour to the barrier, fly the barrier, and then have to come off that and come back. So they were real long flights. I got in about 5,000 hours in 4 years flying the North Atlantic Barrier up there. My main job, excuse me, in that squadron was maintaining the electronics equipment on that airplane. I kept the communications equipment up and all of the radar systems up and the navigation systems up on the airplane in flight. We could repair equipment in flight. I was an in-flight tech. I also operated the height finding radar for them and turned on all the radar for the operators that were looking at the scopes, the Combat Information Center people. We had a CIC officer and a couple other guys. They carried 21 to 22 airplanes, 21 to 22 air crewmen on that aircraft. So you had multiple pilots, multiple navigators, multiple CIC guys. I was the first tech, and then I had a second tech assistant to help me keep all this radar up. One flight I remember, we never aborted a mission all the time I was in the squadron. But one flight I remember the radar, this radar on the airplane, this APS 20, was put out 2 million watts of power. It could reach out there 350 miles to find these airplanes or missiles in the air. And of course, you could see the contacts on the surface, the ships, and you could see the land and all that stuff on your radar scopes. But the pulse forming network on there that generated a 20,000 volt pulse to trigger the magnetron on this radar to put out this 2 million watts of power went bad and started leaking oil all over underneath it. I had to shut the equipment down, pull that big transmitter out, turn it upside down, and change that pulse transformer out in flight and I had to do it in 15 minutes, or we had to call the Ready Alert airplane to replace us. Well, we got it in there, got it cooking, setting in the passageway of the airplane. It wasn't back in its mount. Cranked it up, made a few sweeps so they could check for contacts and out there, and finally got it back in the rack and mounted where it belonged. But when I was working on this thing, you had all this high voltage inside this transmitter, and you had a separate high voltage power supply, and you had a wand that was grounded to the casing on it, and you had to discharge all the electrical energy in there. And I discharged it all. You could see the arcs and sparks and stuff. And I reached in there to pull the cap off of this big hydrogen thyratron, which was a big giant tube that generated this 20,000 volt pulse. And when I reached in there, it still had electricity on it, and it knocked me clear across the airplane underneath the nav table. It took 2 times that for me to realize I needed to go unhook that power supply. The power supply had a problem with it. There was what they call a bleeder resistor that drained off the energy in there, but all I was doing was causing it to have current and recharge it up again, and it kept charging back up and knocking me on my butt.
But probably watched for that when it opportunity to do it again.
Yeah, well, after 2 times I decided to unhook the power supply. When I got back on the ground later, I found out they had a bad bleeder resistor that was supposed to take all that voltage out of there when I discharged it.
Did you make your 15 minutes?
I made my 15 minutes, under 15 minutes, and we never boarded. But all the time I flew all those missions up there, we never boarded one flight and had to launch the Ready Alert airplane.
They appreciated that. You appreciated it because you were ready boy down there on in the hangars.
Right.
You were back up sometimes too.
Right. We always had a backup airplane on
Yes,
Ready
sir.
Alert, and that aircraft was there, fueled and ready to go in case the one that was out there flying the mission, because we needed 100% coverage 24 hours a day, every day of the year while we was flying that North Atlantic barrier.
Was Russia watching you?
Russia was watching us. We got to see a couple of Russian Bears, which was their big 4-engine turboprop bombers that carried nuclear weapons.
You were looking for those guys.
Oh yeah, we'd see them, and we'd find them, and they'd fly right up to us and fly alongside us. So
Wave back and forth to each other.
Yeah.
I've heard stories.
But my last year in the squadron, I got in the Bird's Eye crew, which was a crew that flew over to the North Pole, taking pictures of the ice floes and the ice up there, and it would kind of let the submarines know where they could surface or not surface up there in that area. We flew out of Thule, Greenland, and we flew out of Bodø, Norway, and we flew out of Fairbanks, Alaska, making different sections of the area up there, taking pictures, and we carried some civilians with us as well. So that was a little different.
You've hit on this twice about these secret agents, civilians as well. Who are those guys?
Well, those people were with the National Geographic Survey people there that flew with us on those flights.
Okay, civilians.
And we figured if we ever went down up there, we would, if the airplane was in enough peace we could survive, we had a survival kit with us. Otherwise, we just wore summer flying gear up there. We didn't put on a lot of winter clothes and stuff. Super Connie was really a nice airplane. It was well air conditioned and heated, and we carried.
It was originally a passenger plane, or it was possibly.
It was. It's the old Super Connie. They had taken, strengthened it up, and put bigger engines on it than the civilian versions. And a lot of Navy airplanes that happened with. The P-3 that I flew later on was originally was a Lockheed Electra, and it became the P-3 Orion. They put stronger wings on it, bigger engines, and so it could do its missions and fly faster. But those were my first 2 squadrons I flew in. I probably got about 2,000 hours flying the P-2Vs and the first VP-22, and then over 5,000 hours in the Super Connies. In the Navy, you usually do sea duty, and then you go to shore duty. But because I had broken service, I did sea duty back to back. And then I went from there to shore duty in Naval Air Technical Training Center in Millington, Tennessee, which is where they'd done all the aviation maintenance training courses for the Navy.
Can you update me on your grade and what year we're in?
I had went back in the Navy as a second-class petty officer, which was an E-5, and I made first class while I was in VW-13. And I left there and I went to Nat Center, Memphis, NATTC.
Can you give me a year? Can you give me a year?
In Millington. That was in 1963.
Yes, sir.
June of 63, July 63. And I went to instructor duty there. They put me through instructor training, which was the best thing they ever did for me. And I taught all of the aviation electronics course. This is from basic electronics through the communication systems, radar antennas, transmission lines, waveguides, radar, wave shaping circuits, and how radar worked and all that stuff. I taught all that. And then we had some phases there where they actually taught you some actual equipment that was out in the fleet. I went and taught the ARN-21 TACAN course, which was a really unusual piece of equipment. It would teach you, it would give you a bearing to the station, and it would give you the distance to this thing. And they used it a lot in civilian as well as in the Navy there. And I taught that course. I made Chief Petty Officer, which was E7. In the Navy, the Chief Petty Officer's ranks are a little bit different than the rest of the services. You get a lot more responsibility, and as they say, the admirals always say, the chiefs run the Navy. And if you want somebody to, you need a question answered, you go see the chief. So I made chief there, and I left there in 1967 and joined Patrol Squadron 48, who was on deployment in Vietnam at the time. They were home ported in Iwakuni, Japan, doing their major maintenance, and they would go into Vietnam and fly their market time missions. These market time missions were patrols stopping supplies from getting into Vietnam by sea. And we would go down, and we flew out of U Tao, Thailand, and Cam Ranh Bay, and we got into Da Nang and Tan Son Nhut Air Base out of Saigon as well. But we would go down to the Gulf of Tonkin, or to the Gulf of Cambodia, cross country, and fly all the way up the coast looking for targets. And we carried bullpup missiles and rockets, and we either took them out or we went and had the destroyers or whoever's out there patrolling with us go over and take them out and check them out.
You once they were discovered, you talked directly to the, let's say the boat on the Mekong River up there.
No, we were talking to the people in the blue water that they called off the coast of the Vietnam. Yes, and that's where we were doing our patrols. We were on the South China Sea, basically, and from the Gulf of Cambodia, South China Sea, all the way up to the Gulf of Tonkin.
Russian ships?
These were usually sampans, junks, and stuff that the VC and the North Vietnamese were trying to get supplies in there with them. And you could always tell when you got one that was good when you put a rocket into it, it would blow sky high. And,
Score.
We would spend a little time, if we had enough fuel, on station with the aircraft carrier out of the Gulf of Tonkin area up there, doing night searchlight runs for them on contacts. And they'd have F-4 Phantoms flying cap over the top of us, and if there was anything was a bad guy, that they would take them out.
It's their job.
Yeah, and then we would go back home. One of those deals, we usually were kind of low on fuel when we headed back for Cam Ranh Bay or wherever we was going, and we one night we couldn't get into Cam Ranh Bay because the C-130 had crashed on the runway, and they had it all tied up, and we only had about 45 minutes reserved, so we had to go to Da Nang, and we got in there with barely enough fuel to get there.
Yeah, you got first in line on the
we did.
In the stack.
We had climbed up to 16,000 feet, and we would shut down a couple of our engines. The P-3 had 4,600 horsepower turboprops on it, T-56s, and we would shut down a couple of those engines and just fly on 2 engines to conserve fuel. So we got up to 16,000 feet, and they called us up and asked us to climb higher because they had artillery going to 16,000 feet. We said, no, we can't do that. So they made a corridor down through there for us to fly between their shelling. And again, we didn't have enough fuel to deviate or anything because we just barely had enough to get back to Da Nang.
That's one, well, they don't chuck airplanes, but they surely don't, what is that plane worth besides souls?
Oh, it was worth several million dollars back then. They would cost a lot more now.
Right,
I mean, we're
replacement.
talking about millions and millions. Even the old Super Connie was worth several $million.
Just with mission gear.
The electronics on the airplanes, you know, the P-3's Orion, which we were flying there, VP-48, and then later I was flying in VP-47. Their primary mission was anti-submarine warfare. And they were out there to hunt down the Russian subs, or actually anybody's that's out there. And that equipment was very expensive. But we had radar on it as well. It wasn't as powerful as the radars we had in the Connies. And it actually had two transmitters. They had one in the front of the airplane, one in the back. And each one of them scanned about 200 degrees.
Overlap.
And they overlapped. And they were synchronized so that you couldn't tell looking at the radar scope. And all the navigation equipment stuff we had in there. But the ASW equipment, that made the airplane very expensive. We carried 11 or 12 people on the P-3s, one full crew. And a lot of our missions were 12 hours long or more. So, we had one airplane blown up right after we got back from flying on the ground. They had sapper team came aboard Cameron Bay. And this was in our second deployment, which was in 1970.
Yeah,
and
late.
Punched a bunch of holes in the bottom of the airplane, and we had one attack. The Cameron Bay used to get rocket attacks all the time about 2 o'clock in the morning. And you'd be in the movie, that outside movie over there, because it was fairly warm where we was at. And sirens go off and everybody head for the bunkers.
Last one loses.
Yeah.
Last one through the hole loses.
But that sapper team that got that airplane that night also got our hangar. They blowed up, they passed up all the work centers and threw their satchel charge in the head, which was the restrooms, and blowed the side of the hangar out. We had to rebuild that side of the hangar. They also got our line shack and blowed up our popcorn machine. We were making popcorn and selling it to the Air Force on the other side of the base there at Cameron Bay. So that was the most exciting time, I think, that I can remember as far as the attacks were. Yeah. I was there, and we was gone flying one day, and a rocket came over and got the barracks that my crew's room was in. Luckily, they was out flying. Lost all their clothes, so they was kind of down to flight suits for a while till he got some gear back. But
on these extended flights, I want to try to see the inside of this cabin you're in.
We had a little place back there where we could plug in an electric skillet and cook. And sometimes we carried prepared rations that we had to cook. Sometimes we got with box lunches that had sandwiches and stuff that we carried just for us.
Did you bring anything of your own, candy bars?
Oh yeah, stuff? You could bring anything you wanted, you know, as far as to eat candy bars or sandwiches and stuff with you on the airplanes. And we usually had rations just before we went flying. They would have special meals for the air crews that were going out.
Like Last Supper?
Yeah. Yeah. But our first deployment, we did lose one crew. They had been flying mission in Japan and in Vietnam, and they were headed back to take the airplane back to Iwakuni, Japan, where they were doing the major maintenance, the phase maintenances on the airplane. And the navigator made a mistake. They let down too early and hit a mountain, heading into Japan, back to Iwakuni. And we had about 2 months left, or 2 weeks left on that deployment, and everybody would have been going home. So it's kind of sad homecoming for that, for the squadron that time. And I went back early and retrieved all the airplanes to get them, bring them back home base. We were stationed out of Moffett Field, California, which is just around San Jose, Mountain View there. So that was probably one of the worst times in one of the squadrons in the Navy where it wasn't too happy.
Well, it wasn't normal. It was something out of the ordinary.
It was out of the ordinary. Well, I can't say that either, because in our second deployment, our sister squadron, VP 26 from the East Coast, was cross-decking out to Vietnam, and they had 2 airplanes actually shot down by the Cambodian gunboats. One of them went and ditched, and most of the crew got out. The other one flew till the wing fell off the airplane. Of course, all those guys died. So yeah, we lost some airplanes over there, but it was to me, Vietnam. I did see a thing from some general. They did an interview the other day that said Vietnam wasn't a total lost deal, that it really did slow the communism down quite a bit. But
we made a stand.
We made a stand there, and but as far as I'm concerned, the politicians went and gave that country back to the North Vietnamese. But things have really changed today. I mean, the North Vietnamese are our friends and buddies, and you can go over there and visit, and tourists can go over there now and everything.
Would you go?
No, I don't need to go back over there.
Yeah, I've heard that. I have no need to. I'll never be 18 again.
Yeah, well, I was 29 and 30 when I went over there the first time, and second time. So I had been in the Navy for over 8 years, off and on active duty.
Old guy.
So, yeah, I was the old guy.
Yeah.
I remember when I first went in the Navy, when I was in Patrol Squadron 22, you know, you're out there 18 or 19, and you got a plane commander up there, and he's 30 years old, and that's the old man. Then I went from that patrol squadron, I went to this advanced electronics course that the Navy had. It was basically a college engineering degree in 11 months without all the frills and stuff. And we would go to school about 6 in the morning and get out at 3 in the afternoon and do homework to 2 in the morning. It was 11 months of hell. I didn't even want to read a book after going through that course.
It's not supposed to be easy.
It wasn't. I mean, we did everything. I mean, we really went through the electronics, how to build electronics mathematically. We done all kinds of physics. I mean, we had electrical physics, you name everything, every kind of physics in the world, and integral differential calculus, because when you look at electronics there, particularly the radar circuits, if you take and start out with a sine wave type electrical signal and you use pulse forming networks to make these real narrow spikes that they use to trigger the radar that fires that transmitter out there, then you are integrating this thing. You take and wave shape it down to a pulse. Well, you can also do the opposite. You can differentiate, or you can differentiate it and take it back the other way. And that's, you could figure this all out mathematically, what resistors, capacitors, and transformers you needed to make that wave shaping circuit there. And of course, we did physical, mechanical physics as well. We even computed how to generate a thing that would launch something in different angles and stuff, and how far it would go and all that stuff. And,
that's mathematics. That's
right.
Descriptive geometry.
Yeah, we were doing everything. Most of the guys that went into the aviation electronics courses had to have at least algebra. Yeah, because when they were going through the courses, they did a lot of that stuff, figuring out them circuits and timing and all that stuff when you're generating these pulses, and of course working with your wave guides, your transmission lines and all that stuff. You had to figure all that stuff out. It was really a technical field. I enjoyed the electronic stuff. And of course I went through that advanced electronics course there, and I had a set of orders to go to Hawaii again to this utility squadron, and I got to talking to people out of Naval Air Maintenance Training Group headquarters there, right there at Millington where I was in school there. And they said, "Boy, they need guys like you over there. You need to go talk to the commanding officer." So I went over there and I got my orders changed. And that's what became a tech rep for them. I set up schoolhouses for all the helicopter programs. I had all them for teaching maintenance. If you had an H-46 in the Navy, then you had an H-46 Naval Air Maintenance Training Group detachment on each coast. Okay. And I had to, they get new equipment, they get new helicopters. We'd had to set up new maintenance courses. We'd train our people on how to fix the airplanes, the mechanics, the airframes guys, the engine guys, the electronics guys, the electricians. And we had schools for all those guys. And they still do that today. And I did 2 tours at Naval Air Maintenance Training Group headquarters.
Where was that?
It's in Millington, Tennessee, okay. And that was in 1971. I went to the Advanced Electronics course, so 72 I went and moved on over to there.
What was your grade?
I was a senior chief. I made senior chief while I was going
E-7.
through that Advanced Electronics course coming out of Vietnam. I made it right on time. You had to do 3 years as a chief, and then you moved up to E-8, which was a senior chief, where chief was E-7.
Nobody gets that. When you get up, start 8, 9 in that area like that, my experience with the Air Force, man, you know, you scurry around them because they run the show.
Yeah, yeah. The Navy didn't have the E-8s and E-9 ranks back in the 50s when I was in VP 22. The chiefs back then, when you made chief, you were a temporary chief for a year. And then once you made the permanent grade, it took almost an act of Congress to bust you. So you became a permanent chief. And then about 1960, the Fleet Reserve Association, which is a military association out here for the enlisted Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guards, they pushed for higher grades in the enlisted ranks to give more advancement to the enlisted peoples. And that's when they came in with the E-8 and E-9, or the senior chief and master chief ratings.
And that was what year?
That was in 1960. Somewhere time between 59 when I got out and 1960, January when I went back in, they came out with that.
You had to do
grades.
something really, really evil to lose 8 and 9.
Yeah, you did, but I can see there are a few of them losing them now. They get in trouble. I was a senior chief there in Naval Air Maintenance Training Group headquarters, and then I retired after 20 years of service in 1975 in July. And I got out, and I had gotten my pilot's certificates while I was down in Tennessee in the 60s. In about 64, I think I got my first pilot certificate as a private pilot. But before I left there, I was a commercial pilot with a flight instructor rating by 1967. And I was teaching people to fly in the flying clubs at the military bases, the Navy bases. We had a best flying club in the world there in Millington. We had probably 300 members. We had about 8 Cessna 150s we were using for flight training, a couple of 172s, Cessna 172s, Cessna 182, a Cessna 207. We had a couple of Piper twins that we use, a Aztec and an old Apache that we use for multi-engine training, and we had a Navy T-34 that we were using for trainings. So we had a really big flying club there, and you could attain any flight, any FAA pilot certificate ratings and flight instructor ratings there.
Did that cost the airmen or the?
We had to pay the flying clubs. Initially, we had some Piper Colts that we were using for training, which were old ragwing Pipers, and we traded 5 of them off to this company, South Air Corporation down there. They got rid of them for us, and they brought these Cessna 150s out there for us to use for flight training. We paid them $4 an hour. We charged the pilots $8 an hour. So the club got $4 an hour, and that helped pay for the fuel. We was getting our fuel through the Navy base there.
Did you box?
Yeah, actually I did when I was a kid. My dad had me and my brother in Golden Gloves boxing, and our trainer was actually a sparring partner for Jack Dempsey up here in Montrose, Colorado. And Jack Dempsey was from Montrose. This guy was a sparring partner for me. He got killed one night. He was driving his car, and there was a truck parked alongside the road with no lights on it, and he crashed in the back of it. That was the end of our Golden Gloves boxing career. If they had a movie came into town, my dad went down and saw it about boxing. But otherwise, he wouldn't go to the movie. I remember he was in a movie theater when the war was going on. They were showing all the killing and stuff, and it just upset him so bad he would not go back to the movie. He would not watch those news programs. That's where he used to get all the news, was in the movie theaters, and he would not go back. If they had one of them news things going, he'd go outside the theater till it was over, and then go back in to watch his.
Growing up, what do you know about his history?
Well, my dad, like I say, he was born in Decatur, Illinois. He came out to Colorado with his family, who settled around Burlington, Colorado out there. And they had a bunch of big 500-acre farms and stuff, his relatives did. His mom and dad died while he was about 9 years old. And so he just kind of knocked around with his cousins and worked in the ranches out there. He told me about riding horse herding cows clear back to Omaha, Nebraska, across the plains when the grass was that deep and everything. And he also told me about getting tossed off the horse and dragged by the stirrup. He was lucky somebody come over and stopped the horse, or he could have got killed.
Knocked him in the head.
And then he moved to Grand Junction with the CCCs, the Civilian Conservation Corps. He helped build the Colorado National Monument up here. And they had one big rock fall up there that killed a bunch of people, and he was supposed to be out there working that day, but he was sick, and they kept him in camp. The CCCs kind of were run like the Army, and I've got a picture of his discharge at home. He also worked on the Land's End Road on Grand Mesa, and they also cleaned the forests up there. They used to clean all the brush out to reduce the possibility of forest fires. And then he got discharged from that, and he got married, and his first wife died of pneumonia. My mom helped take care of her, and then him and my mom got married. And then I had one sister born 36, and then I was born 37. My brother was born in 38. And then we didn't have any kids for about 6 years, and I had another brother born 6 years after I was born. Then we had, after him, about 4 or 5 years, then we had the last three girls of my family. We had 7 kids, but there were 3 younger girls that were after that.
They're still in the valley, or?
Yeah, all of the younger girls are in the valley. My older sister lives in Alaska. My brother next to me that was a year younger, he died about 4 years ago of silicosis of the lungs from hauling uranium ore. My other brother still lives here. The youngest brother still lives here in Grand Junction as well. And he tried to go in the Navy when I did, but they wouldn't take him. He had a heart murmur, and he had a dislocated shoulder. Even the Army wouldn't take him.
In your time in the service, did you try to get back here?
I used to come back all the time on leave while I was in there. When I retired on 20 years, when I left Naval Air Maintenance Training Group there, my first wife that I had got married to in 1960, she got breast cancer and passed away at 28 years old. And I had 3 kids, and then I met my second wife, Square Dancing, and we got married just before I got out. And I got out and I worked for my brother and for other construction companies as a corporate pilot. A lot of time working for my brother and this other construction company. I would run heavy equipment once in a while. I'd work in the office doing payroll and all that stuff. And I would fly people and money and parts around. I was a parts expediter as well, getting parts for the equipment. was big heavy stuff, like we was moving a cat, something like drive truck hauling caterpillars and big 641 scrapers and loaders and whatever we had to move for the construction outfit. And the last big job that I had with my brother, we had a 421 Golden Eagle, pressurized twin, nice airplane, cruised about 230 mile an hour, and it'd go up to 30,000 feet. So it was a real nice job. But I also, we were down at what they call the Tickaboo down here near Bullfrog on Lake Powell. We built a big uranium mill site there with 3 big reservoirs for the General Electric, I think was the primary owner, but we was working for this other company out of Mountain States Minerals Engineering out of Tucson, Arizona. We had 350 people working for us. We probably had, well, we had 16 D9s, about 16 641, 651 scrapers, 988, 992 loaders. We had a bunch of big heavy equipment.
Big stuff.
Big stuff. And it was
Move
about
dirt.
a $17 million job.
Okay.
We had went from doing a $20,000 field leveling job in 1975 to that job in 1980, 81. And that was our last big job. The economy had went to hell. And the Navy called me up in late 81, asked me to go back in, so I went back in the Navy. And
Yeah, it dumped here at that time too, because oil shale was rock
Right,
solid and it was going to save the world.
I had worked, when we finished that job, I had worked on a project on the oil shale up out of Parachute up there on top of the mountain as a foreman for 'em. And they wouldn't pay my crew to ride from the bottom to the top of the hill like I was paying everybody else, so I went and quit. Then they paid my crew. And I recommended another guy take that foreman job, and I went and done another job, but then I went back in the Navy.
It fell on the sword.
Fell on the sword, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you got to take care of your guys,
You
just like
do.
they taught me in the Navy. Anyway, I went back in the Navy. They took me back because they wanted me as an instructor. But by the time I got back in February '82, apparently they didn't need me, so they were sending me to patrol squadron. They told me I was going to this patrol squadron in Hawaii, and I would have to do 3 years instead of 2. So I said, okay. Then they didn't send me to Hawaii. They sent me to Moffett Field again to Patrol Squadron 47. And they sent me through the RAG, which is the training squadron, VP 31 there, as an in-flight tech. And by the time I got through that, I went back in February, and by March, we was sitting in Misawa, Japan on deployment. And we had airplanes scattered all over. We had some in Guam, we had some flying out of Misawa, we had some that were clear down in Diego Garcia, which is about 10 degrees south of the equator off of India. And them flights were flying into Mogadishu, Djibouti, East Africa, and into the Red Sea, which is the back door to the Near East over there where all the battles going on in Afghanistan, Iraq, and over there now. So we were doing that clear back in 1982, and then again back in 84 and 85. Only in 84 and 85 we were flying out of Kadena, Okinawa, and then down into the Philippines and Singapore and into Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is a little atoll down there. It belongs to the British. It's called the British Indian Ocean Territories, and it looks like a footprint out there in the middle of the Indian Ocean out there.
You land on the foot.
They call it the footprint of freedom. Oh. And it's just the Diego Garcia is just one island there.
Yeah.
And I went down there, and I'd have to go. I was running the maintenance department as a maintenance material control master chief, and I was still an E8 doing an E9 job. And it was good because it did help me make Master Chief in 3 years after I'd been back in the Navy again, which took me all the way up to E9, the top of the pole for the enlisted.
Break in service. Break in service. You're not lucky. You had to work for it. Nobody gave it away.
No, they didn't. And it's because of the jobs I took. When you're doing the E9 job in these squadrons, that looks good on your performance evaluations that go in before the board. The Navy used to make you take tests for all ratings, but when I went back in '82, the E-8s and E-9s didn't have to take tests anymore. They figured you knew your rating. They looked primary on your time and grade, time and service, and your performance evaluations.
Performance evaluations, everything.
Those are the things that told them. They looked at leadership, knowledge of your job, and how well you were performing everything that was required in that squadron. Well, the Master Chief, Maintenance Material Control Master Chief, is the E-light over the maintenance department on these different squadrons, whether you're a patrol squadron, fighter squadron, or whatever it is. You have to know supply, you have to know leadership, you have to know personnel management, you have to know all of the administration of the squadron as well as your administration of your maintenance department. You've got to make sure that people are being trained, and you've got to go in there and look at your different aircraft and determine which ones you have to prioritize for the different work centers to work on. Your mechanics, your airframes, power plants.
You have to know what's needed.
You
and
schedule all the
schedule everything
maintenance.
out. Yes, sir.
I had the XO executive officer of the squadron come down one time, and we were doing a exercise in mining. That was one of the missions that the P3s and the old P2s did as well. The patrol squadrons. We mined the harbors in Haiphong Harbor when I was there in 1970 to stop the supplies, Russians from getting supplies into North Vietnam.
You have ordnance.
Yeah.
Ordnance.
The politicians made us let the Russians get their ships out first, but then we went in there. There was 3 squadrons, and we went in there and put these mines in the Haiphong Harbor there.
Southern California, the institutions there went wild when we mined Haiphong Harbor.
Well, it stopped them from killing a lot of our troops.
You're absolutely right.
But anyway, they had this mining training mission going on out there, and we had to get 5 airplanes out there with this exercise. And they had a range up in north of Whidbey Island where they would do this practice thing, and they had shore stations to let you know, because you had to lay these mines exactly in a specific position.
Got to know where they're at.
You had to know where they was at
you might have to
exactly.
get through them.
And they would grade you on how well you were putting these things where you're supposed to. And
because if
anyway,
you have to get through them, if the U.S. Navy has to slip through them,
right,
they'd
and
sure
then,
like to know where
well,
they're at.
Then we have to go back and take them out too later on. Well, they did that with helicopters and ships. They had minesweeper ships, and they had helicopters that did it as well. They had these mining squadrons, the helicopters. But anyway, the XO came down there. He said, "I want my airplane." I said, "You're not going to get it." I said, "It's in corrosion control. Flying these airplanes over the ocean and getting sea spray on them, salt water, makes you get corrosion on the metal in the airplane. And so you have each aircraft scheduled for corrosion control every 14, 28, 56 days of the time. And when that airplane goes in corrosion, the upper echelons say it will stay in corrosion until you get it done." Well, he come down and said he wanted his airplane. I said, "No, it's in corrosion control. I want my airplane to fly on this mission." I said, "You're not going to get it." He says, "You always talk to a commander, the XO, like that?" I said, "Yes, sir, because I got an admiral over here who says that's the way it's going to be." I said, "You can have this airplane.
This is my airplane."
That's exactly what I told him. He says, "That's my airplane." I said, "No, it's not. It's my airplane. I'm the Maintenance Material Control Master Chief, and that airplane is mine until I give it to you."
Sir.
Sir. So he took the airplane I gave him, and he went out and flew his mission. And then the Chief of Naval Operations came out with a deal on smoking. Smoking was a health issue in the Navy. A lot of people are having problems, and a lot of them are having problems later on from smoking. And so he put out a thing when I was in control of the maintenance department that said, if you can't move so many thousand cubic feet of air in a work center or anywhere where people are in these shops or offices or anywhere in this hangar, if you don't have a system will move that kind of air to keep it purified or keep it clean, there's no smoking in that. If there's one guy that don't smoke in that work center. So I posted no smoking in the whole maintenance department.
You smoked or didn't?
I have never smoked in my life.
All right.
Never have touched a cigarette. Anyway, I
That's
shut down all the
odd.
smoking.
You're odd, because I can walk into offices in the military and see these lifers, and there's a cup of there's coffee and cigarettes. There's always a full ashtray, or maybe not, but you expect that.
Well, the Navy got really serious about the smoking and tobacco use. They actually shut it down completely on ships for quite a while there and everything, and that was probably really tough on a lot of sailors. But I don't know what they do out there now. They've probably got a smoking area, and that's what I did. I set one up in the end of our parking lot, way out in the middle of the boondocks, and you put what's called a butt kit out there for me. And I told them, they have two master chiefs in most squadrons. One's the maintenance control master chief, and the other one is the command master chief. He's strictly the leadership stuff, working with the XO and the CO for inspections and anti-drug programs and all that stuff. And that's his echelon, strictly military stuff like that. And then, of course, the maintenance material control master chief, I run the whole maintenance department, keeping them airplanes flying.
Or else.
So you had these two master chiefs in most squadrons. If they didn't have two of them, then he put a senior chief in as one of the place, and that's how I got to be the maintenance control material control master chief as an E-8, as a senior chief in VP 47. And anyway, I put that thing way out in the middle of nowhere, and I told them if I found one butt on the ground that I would shut down smoking out there too.
You catch anybody?
So
you guys got in trouble too, because you had to.
A lot of the smoking chiefs and smoking officers complained to the skipper, the commanding officer, about it. And they come down there and said, "Can he do that?" And I just showed them that little piece of paper. Said the Chief of Naval Operations says you will. And I told them, it ain't me. I'm just following orders from up above you guys. And it stayed in place all the time I was in the squadron anyway.
It's good.
There was no smoking.
What about the drum of rum?
They did with that long before I got in the Navy. No rum for the sailors anymore, but I did them 2 deployments with Patrol Squadron 47, and then I went from there. I was supposed to be a ground pounder up there. I wasn't supposed to be flying, but I was still getting about 300 hours in 6 months of flying all over to Diego Garcia and to Guam and all them places.
You got your flight play. You got hazardous. You got extra money, 200 extra months?
Well, it varies. You know, it started out with about $75 a month for a full set of flight pay for the enlisted and stuff down there, and later on it went up to like 150, and I don't think I drew more than like $225 a month, but now it depends on how long you've been on sea duty, how many of them sea duty squadrons you've been, how much flight time you've got, how much flight pay you get. And it's hazardous, the additional hazardous duty pay.
It is. You fall out of the sky, and with no parachute, how do you get out of this thing?
Well, a lot of them airplanes go out there and they don't come back.
They never know what happened to them.
I mean, a couple squadrons out of Moffett Field had a mid-air down there. One relieving on station. They were down at an exercise area off of California down there. And they had specific rules about this airplane had to be at this altitude and this one had to be at another altitude when they were relieving each other. And this one had to be leaving the area and left the area before he started climbing. They usually had to climb up to higher altitudes to fly back to Moffett Field, where we had about 6 or 7 squadrons there. And this squadron went down there and they relieved this other guy at night, and the guy climbed before he left the area, and they run together and wiped out 2 airplanes and 2 full crews. And it was a pilot error. It was a bad mistake. Crew area.
Everybody pays.
Yeah.
I mean,
crew error.
even the base.
And I know VW-13, before I joined the squadron, had one that was out there flying this mission. It made its position report as it turned the corner, and they never heard from it again. They never found anything. Yeah, there was 21, 22 guys. Oh, yes. When an airplane goes down, and I've flown a lot of missions with my patrol squadrons looking for airplanes that have went down, particularly Air Force airplanes. When we were back home at Barbers Point there, when I was in Hawaii, the old Air Force was flying them old KC-97s, and they had hollow-bladed props, and they had a problem with them throwing the props. They go through the side of the airplane, and the airplane go down the ocean, and we'd go out and look for them. Seen a couple seats floating out there, and maybe a couple life rafts, but no people. Well, airplane probably went right straight in the water and uncontrolled. So that was another mission we did, was search and rescue. We could go out there, and we did, when we was flying in the Bering Sea, the Russians had a lot of submarines that was having problems. They'd be surfaced out there smoking, some have a fire on them. And one time they had a guy that had a medical problem. He was getting ready to have one of his things burst on him, and so we talked to him. Our XO could speak Russian, and I was flying with him, and he talked to him, and they had come up and give us a SOS signal, and so we flew out there and talked to him, and we got the Coast Guard to go out and pick this guy off of this submarine, bring him into ADAC. We flew back to ADAC, and we picked him up, put him in our airplane, and flew him to the Air Force Base in Anchorage at Elmendorf there, and put him in the hospital. And then we stayed about a week while they got somebody from the State Department down there that could speak Russian and everything, take care of this guy.
You'd expect the same consideration.
Oh, yeah,
With
sure.
his soldiers or sailors, whatever.
But we would see these Russian subs up there 4 or 5 times, sitting on the water, disabled, and we'd get one of our ships to go help them, or we would talk to they had a bunch of these fishing boats up that were really not fishing boats. They were intelligence gathering ships that were monitoring us and all the military activity out of Alaska.
Did you know they were did you know where they were at?
Oh, yes. We did patrols up there on a regular basis, so we would see where these ships and stuffs were at, and
They were watching
plot
you.
their courses and
You were
speeds.
watching them.
Yeah.
They were watching you. You were watching them.
And we would send them over to pick up their submarines, and they'd drag them back to Vladivostok, Russia, where their sub pens was at. But even now, the Russians, they don't have the money to keep their submarines and stuff up, and they just rush into putting them things out there.
Did you, flying in Indochina, did you see, I'm backing up, did you see anything with China? Did you push on China anywhere?
I was in ADAC in VP 48 in 1968 on our deployment there, and we was getting ready to come home, and they sent us to Korea to fly missions to replace the Super Constellation, which was one of the intelligence airplanes that the North Koreans had shot down. And we was watching China a lot, and that's why I got my Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal from flying those missions out there. We didn't get to come home right away. We had to go over there first, then we come back. And then we flew home with the whole squadron. 12 airplanes flew out of ADAC to Midway, and from Midway they had us doing an exercise on the Air Force's radar stuff, watching for stuff coming into Hawaii. We snuck in underneath their radar, 12 airplanes.
Tag. Remember Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
So what I want to do is that we've got about 15 minutes left,
Okay.
and I'm having a splendid time. I'm really enjoying this. We don't have to take off 15 minutes, or you can. Is there anything you'd like to leave history?
Well, all I can say is, I did my 30 years in the Navy, and I was glad I went back in that last 10 years. And last time I re-enlisted, I was in a special outfit in Dallas, Texas, Naval and Military Personnel Command, and Bureau of Naval Personnel said, we won't let you re-enlist unless you put your papers in to retire no later than August 1st. So I put my papers in to retire at the end of July of 1992. And I was in that special outfit when they were doing the first Gulf War, #1. So I did get to see technology from World War II advance up to what they have today.
Where's it going?
Some of the stuff out there you wouldn't believe on what they do for their anti-submarine warfare, the missiles and all the rest of the stuff that we're using today in the fleet. And I would imagine, what I've seen, that the P-3s were actually being developed long before they got rid of the P-2Vs. The P-2Vs were being developed during World War II. That's how far the development of these things are ahead of when it actually comes online.
So what's next?
And
is it satellite? Are we anti-gravity? I'm not trying to be.
I don't know that. I have no idea on that kind of stuff. I just know what the electronics out there is amazing. You look for when I was first a radio communicator on the old P-2V Neptunes, our long-range communications, our high-frequency radios were Morse code. I could send and receive almost 60 words a minute with Morse code.
Alpha.
And it got to where I didn't hear the dots and dashes. I heard words. That's how you got to where you could do that. I had a radioman from World War II. The original radios were the AL rating. That's what an aviation radioman was the AL rating. And we had some of them in the squadron with me when I was in VP-22. And I had one guy would sit there talking to you, listen to the intercom to the pilots in the other parts of the air crew, listen to music on the radio, and listen to a message coming in on Morse code all at the same time.
But he's talking to him.
And he would be talking to me. And then he would sit there and type it all out. Me, I couldn't do that. I have to shut all that other stuff off,
It was his language.
But yeah, it was his language. But I got to where I heard words rather than hearing the individual letters and stuff, and that's how you get up to 60 words a minute. I can still copy a little code today.
Did you ever work with teletype, with
tape? When we got to the P3s, we had teletypes.
On board?
We had teletype on board, yeah.
So you made tape?
And we made tape. Well, we actually printed it out. We had a printer on it.
Yeah.
And when I was flying in Vietnam, in my second tour over there, the first tour I was in the second tour I was in the skipper's crew in ADAC and then part of Vietnam. And then when he left and we got a new commander, they moved us down to a different crew. And I was the XO had moved up to skipper, but he liked to fly with our crew. And whenever some VIPs needed moving around, they would use the P3s to do that. And they always asked our crew to move the higher echelon stuff. And the Admiral J.J. Highland was Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, and he was ComNav Forces Vietnam, Naval Forces Vietnam. And he would fly us a lot. He would get a big legal pad, yellow sheet, and he would be writing his messages out, and he'd hand them to me. He says, correct the spelling, and he'd give that to me, and I would send it out, and all his traffic was flash traffic, which was the highest priority. And he said, you got that already? And I'd give him a copy off of the thing. I said, I corrected the spelling for you, sir.
Those were just regular Joes, weren't they?
Yeah, he was great. And, I actually being a rated commercial pilot and stuff, my skipper then always utilized my skills. How can I train my pilots to be better pilots? Because I had more flying time than most of them. I mean, I have over 10,000, 12,000 hours of civilian flying time. Actually, I got over 10,000 hours as a flight instructor teaching people to fly. And he would let me get up there and fly the airplane. As long as you had one rated pilot that was at least a 2P in the right seat or the left seat,
Right.
then I could get up there and fly the airplane. And I used to teach them how to, well, they didn't have the ILSs. Navy used GCAs, ground control radar approaches, and I would teach them how to use the GCAs, and I flew a bunch of GCA approaches, King Salmon up there in Alaska, and they'd pull engines on me. You know, you have to lose the number 1 or number 2 engine, or pull a couple of them back, and you had to keep flying the airplane. The
Yeah,
P3 would fly on 2 engines, even if you had both of them out on one side. We have 4 engines, so, you know, it'd still fly on 2, but.
So you, on board the aircraft, you had a mechanical guy there too. You had on the aircraft.
We had a flight engineer that was usually an engine mechanic or an airframes guy or an electrician. And later on, even the ATs, the aviation electronics techs, they needed flight engineers enough they would let even my rating go over there.
Somebody had to be the boss on which engine goes up first. You know, you have to have an engineer.
Yeah, and he was usually the guy that set the final power settings, and if you feathered an engine, he was the one that would feather the engine where
Weights
they'd
and
shut it
balances,
down.
How heavy you are because you're losing
Right,
fuel all the time.
he always computed your weight so you knew what your approach speeds were supposed to be when you were making your landings. Now if we were light enough, we could land as slow as 90 knots, which was, you know.
Which was a nice crash landing.
Was really, really slow. You didn't take that much wind. The P3, you could reverse the propellers on it and use it to shut you down real quick on a short field landing. The fact is, you could back up with them things. You just put them in reverse and put some power on it, and you could back up. P3 was a really good airplane. It's still flying out there, and they're replacing it now with a aircraft that's coming off of the civilian 737 airliner, and it's going to be the P8. I forget what they're going to call it, but it's a P8.
Okay.
Is going to replace the P3s. They got one squadron down in Jacksonville, Florida, that's actually getting the planes right now.
Getting them, okay, they're delivering.
They're
That's
delivering
That's what's
right now,
current.
yeah.
All right.
But if I had to do the Navy career again, I'd do it in a minute. In
You'd
fact,
still
if they
be
let
in
me
it.
back in, I'd go.
You broke service once and they sucked you back in. See how you are? Anyway, I've had a ball. I feel like I know you for the rest of my life. I heard you say this, and you told me about yourself, and I really thank you for doing it. It's certainly my pleasure.
Yeah, well, the Navy made me what I am today, and I've made a career out of flying since I got out of there, and of course, working construction. From what my dad taught us as kids, we learned to run heavy equipment and drive trucks, and I've made a big career. I worked for Kempton Air out here for almost 9 years as chief pilot and chief flight instructor. So what I learned in the Navy, the opportunity I have there has made my life what it is, and I wouldn't change nothing.